Here we revere the words of the great teachers, such as Jesus, the Buddha, and Confucius. It is, however, the task of every UU to be their own Buddha, their own Jesus, their own Confucius. It is our work as a community to walk with each other along the spiritual pathways that lead towards happiness, compassion, and life fully lived. And while we are a safe harbor where there is solace and healing, we are also a launching pad from which we are propelled into the tumult of life to live courageously, justly, and lovingly. In this sacred place, we create the structures that lift up the downtrodden, set the captives free, and heal the brokenhearted. Here we have learned that to be fully human is to be fully divine, and that with a little help from our friends, we can each tell our own unique story. The theme for today is beloved community. Our own Clark Gilpin, historian, professor emeritus, and past dean of the Divinity School at the University of Chicago, will speak on that topic. Additionally, I will, in the Story for All Ages, introduce some of the ideas about beloved community to the kids. Right now, let's have a moment of silence for the people of Ukraine who continue to suffer at the hands of Russia in an immoral and illegal war, and for the many Russian soldiers that have died in the service of tyranny during this last year. In our silence, let us also be mindful of the nearly 1 million people facing famine conditions in Ethiopia, Yemen, South Sudan, Somalia, and Afghanistan. So let's bow our heads to take a minute.
Faith is the gift of God. The true signs of faith are an inner purity and love, and an honest life and good deeds. Love is the ultimate interpretation and completion of the law. According to Jesus' love is the plenitude of the law. Love is a royal commandment. Love is the true freedom, which does not bear the bondage of fear. Love is the creative spirit of the world, the highest treasure of humankind.
Amen. Thank you, Candace. And thank you, Harvey. Good to see you guys. Always good to see the little ones here in church. Okay. So, so you guys are seated. So who wants to hear a love story? Who wants to hear a love story? Anybody? Or it definitely does. Lois is not sure. Oh, she does. Okay, that's good. And Rosie wants to hear one. Let's go. Okay, now there's a lot of debate on whether or not this story I'm about to tell you is true. It doesn't make any difference. True or not, it tells an important truth. A long time ago, there was only God. God was lonely, so decided to make a whole bunch of things like planets and the galaxies and stars. Still, God was lonely, so God decided to make plants and animals and people. God made a beautiful garden for the people, the plants, and the animals, so God could have someone to talk to and just hang out with. God really loved everything God had made. One day the people left the beautiful garden. God felt sad and lonely and just a little angry. So over the years, God tried over the years to get the people to understand how much he loved them. They just wouldn't listen, even though God sent them some commandments to live by and some prophets to tell them about living rightly. God was pretty discouraged until one day he got an idea. Why don't I become a person too? If I become a person, maybe I can show the people how much I love them. So God became a person just like any other person. God became a little baby. When the baby, who was really God, grew up, he went all around telling the people how much he loved them. One of the things that God told the people was how to have a special kind of love in their hearts. A special kind of love he was called agape love, our holy love, because it was the kind of love that God has for people, all people, no exceptions. So kids and adults, does anyone here want to learn the secret of how to have love for people in your heart? Does anyone, just raise your hand, who wants to learn the secret of how? Okay, I'm glad you guys raised your hand because there's no escape now. So So the secret is to be kind. And this is also something that the Buddha agreed with back a long time ago, too. If you are kind in your thinking and doing, you will find that agape love will grow in your hearts. So the question is, maybe we should, or maybe we should do an experiment, a scientific experiment. How many people here are scientists? And they want to do an experiment on this. Okay, Jim knows something up. So yeah, okay. So so we're going to have an experiment. So I'm going to ask you kids and the adults that want to. How many adults would like to take part in the experiment? Raise your hand if you want to take part. If you don't forget who you are. And parents, I'm going to probably send an email in the middle of the week to remind you about your kids and their experiment because I really want them to try this out. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you, does anyone here have someone, maybe someone in their life that they don't like so much? Anybody have anybody like that? Somebody? Oh, okay, a few hands go up. Okay. So here's the scientific experiment. The experiment is if you have somebody, or even if you don't have somebody, I would like you to try and see if thinking kind thoughts about that person and doing one kind thing or saying one kind thing to that person will increase the amount of agape love in your heart, of divine love in your heart. Can you guys do that? Are you willing to do that? Okay. Now, for the kids, here's what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that you don't start out with someone you don't like. I'm suggesting you start out with your teacher. Who has a teacher here that's kind of strict? And yeah, maybe somebody. So are you guys willing to like try to think something kind and say something kind to your teacher? Anybody? Anybody? Okay, yes, it looks like a yes. And how many adults are willing to try that? Okay, a few. Oh, okay, good. Well, you're in luck because next week we'll report back on that. So anyway, so that's our experiment. And thank you for taking part. And you guys can go to your classes now. So let's. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. And now, Clark Gilpin will bring us the message.
The beloved community is a phrase often heard and repeated today. Ah, okay. How am I doing now? Okay. The beloved community is a phrase often evoked today, usually with an acknowledgement of its frequent appearance in the speeches and writings of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Thanks to Leanne for printing in your bulletin and in the announced version of the bulletin online some words from King that incorporate this phrase. These were from a lecture that he delivered in 1957 that was entitled "The Role of the Church in Facing the Nation's Chief Moral Dilemma." Let me read these and then comment on some phrases within this passage to which we'll return. The end is reconciliation. The end is redemption. The end is the creation of the beloved community. It is this type of spirit and this type of love that can transform opponents into friends. The type of love that I stress here is not eros, a sort of aesthetic or romantic love, not philia, a sort of reciprocal love between personal friends, but it is agape, which is understanding goodwill for all men. It is an overflowing love, which seeks nothing in return. It is the love of God working in the lives of men. This is the love that may well be the salvation of our civilization. Some points to which I want to come back. The focus in that opening sentence on the aim, the purpose, the goal of the beloved community. The end is the creation of the beloved community. This is a forward-looking idea. Second, love in beloved community. What exactly does it mean? What form does it take? King lists several possible examples, and I want to come back later to what I'm going to argue is the predominant form of love meant by the phrase the beloved community. Finally, note here in several different ways, King wants to emphasize the transformative power of this beloved community. It can transform opposers into friends. So this morning I want to explore the ways in which the idea of creating the beloved community still today addresses the moral dilemma that is the chief struggle facing this country. A dilemma that remains as urgent today as when Martin Luther King delivered this address 65 years ago. Now, King did not invent the phrase beloved community. Instead, it had emerged from a long but cordial debate at the beginning of the 20th century between two famous philosophers at Harvard University, William James and Josiah Royce. In 1902, William James had published a book entitled The Varieties of Religious Experience, which explored the many personal or individual forms of religious experience. Josiah Royce, his friend, responded in a series of books culminating in 1913 with The Problem of Christianity. According to Royce, we reach a better understanding of religion's contribution to human history when we focus our attention not on individual religious experience, but instead on social religious experience, the religious experiences of community. Royce urged us to think about religions as being like languages. Spanish or English do not come into existence because one individual added a word or two. A geographer contributed the word latitude, or a quilter suggested the words pins and needles. No, languages are the product of communities. People communicating with one another about their shared social welfare, their common good. Religions, in the same way, provide a shared vocabulary, a common way of talking with one another that connects us to one another, but also enables each of us to express ourselves in distinctive ways. That vocabulary can be creatively employed not only to form a community of Spanish speakers or English speakers, but also for each person within that community to express his or her distinctive view of the world. The social, communal religious experience is a shaper both of the community and of the individuals within it. In his book, The Problem of Christianity, Royce illustrates both the promise and the peril of social religious experience through his analysis of the nature of community as a religious ideal. Royce found ethical peril embedded at the heart of every human community. When he titled his book, The Problem of Christianity, he was referring both to the problem Christianity has and the problem Christianity is trying to solve. Communities, he writes, may make unjust war, may enslave mankind, may deceive and betray and torment as basely as do individuals, only more dangerously. Communities conflict with one another, and this potentially irreconcilable polarization of multiple communities caught the attention first of Josiah Royce, but years later, Martin Luther King. This polarizing conflict is also everywhere in our contemporary society. Just as a specific example, and I'm sure your own minds will come up with many more of these, I attended a webinar of the Brookings Institution earlier this month. It was entitled, and think about this title, Understanding the Threat of White Christian Nationalism in American Democracy Today. Understanding the Threat of White Christian Nationalism in American Democracy Today. Multiple words about community, both about its corporate influence shaping the society and about the potential threats that it poses. One of these speakers was from Calvin University, nearby Grand Rapids, Kristen Demez, and a title of one of her very well-known recent books in 2020 has a similar tone. Jesus and John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Fractured a Faith and Corrupted a Nation. So it's an excellent book, by the way, if you get a chance to look at it. I want you to think about two features of this. On the one hand, both Demez, the author, a participant in the webinar, and all of the other participants in the panel are concerned that certain narrowly shaped communities are threatening the wider community. At the same time, they themselves are using polarizing language that in some ways is as alienating to that community as that community is to it, right? Threat, fracture, corrupt. The language of community has broken down between parts of the American community. A second example. When communities are contending with one another in this way over their position and identity in a wider society, some individuals are given no place at all. they become invisible. For example, the plight of migrant workers across the United States today. This morning, the first article I read in the New York Times began with this paragraph. It was almost midnight in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Now, I'm not picking on Grand Rapids, but it was almost midnight in Grand Rapids, Michigan, but inside the factory, everything was bright. A conveyor belt carried bags of Cheerios past a cluster of young workers. One was 15-year-old Carolina Yock, who came to the United States on her own last year to live with a relative she had never met. About every 10 seconds, she stuffed a sealed plastic bag of cereal into a passing yellow carton. It could be dangerous work, with fast-moving pulleys and gears that had torn off fingers of other workers. Name Carolina Yock, because in this society, she is being illegally employed. She is invisible. She's like the cogs and gears at the Cheerio factory. For Josiah Royce, the ethical response to battling communities and isolated individuals was loyalty to a universal community. As he writes, a community unified by an active and indwelling presence. And he found the paradigm for this universal community in the Apostle Paul's understanding of the church. The idea of a spiritual life in which love for all individuals shall be practically harmonized with an absolute loyalty for a real and universal community. Love as a loyalty that builds over time, a sense of meaning and purpose that gives coherent identity to the loyal individual. The distinctive form, then, that love takes in this universal community is loyalty. And I think that's because for Royce, the crucial issue is the persistence of values across time, both for a community and for an individual. What makes an individual recognizable to us? Her loyalties, the consistency with which she holds them, the promises she makes and keeps. Loyalty defines the person over time, and loyalty is the structure of purpose and meaning within the wider community. And in this case, that wider community is a universal community. It is love that does not so much renounce the individual self as devote the self to an all-embracing unity of individuals in one realm of spiritual harmony, says Royce. The object of such devotion is, in ideal, the community which is absolutely loved because absolutely united above all the distractions of separate self-will of its members. In short, that universal community becomes the criterion by which we can evaluate all of the multiple communities in which our everyday life is bound up. is this particular community, this Berean Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, part of, contributor to, builder of the universal community, the beloved community. Beloved in the sense of community of loyalty to a possibility. The beloved community then is a call to ethical action, and it is a criterion for what is genuinely ethical action amidst the plural communities of everyday life. Sorting out when race, nationalism, business interest get in the way of universal community. Although the idea of the church is central to Christianity, Royce concludes, all the Christian ages up to the present one unite not to present us any finished interpretation of the idea of the church, but rather to prove that this idea is as fluid in its expression as it is universal in its aim. Church, in his view, the universal community, in his view, is not a finished product. It is, as Martin Luther King said, the end, the aim, the destiny of the human community. And because of that, it must change, it must adapt, it must reinvent itself, it must reevaluate itself in each cultural moment, as it must do so now in our own cultural moment. Hence, Royce argues, the true church is still a sort of ideal challenge to the faithful, to the loyal, rather than an already finished institution. It is a call upon men for a heavenly quest, rather than a present possession of humanity. Create me. This is the word that the church, viewed as an ideal, addresses to the human community. Create me.
And I just remind you, yes, go ahead. Oh, we don't have, why don't you come up here, Candace?
Somebody extinguish. I invite you to consider living as if you only had 30 days to love your life, 30 days to love this world of people, 30 days to love this earth. Love is really more than an interactive process. It's about what we do, not just what we feel. Love is a verb, not a noun.